Okay, cool. So about half of you. Yeah, we know. We've played. Is everyone keeping cool today? Okay, why don't we... If people come in late, I'll just glare at them like a university professor. It'll be fun. And let me know if I start to back away from the mic and you can't hear me. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm going to be talking about the design process behind my two-player game of Forbidden Love, Star-Crossed. That is, was successfully kickstarted with Bully Pulpit Games, and it will be at least on North American shelves by the end of the year, and it'll be available on our website around the same time too. And if you know any distributors around here, actually, hey, I'd love to have it on your shelves too. So I'm going to be talking about how I feel about design in general. I have a very complicated relationship with that particular modality, and I would like to introduce you to my perspective on the necessity or lack thereof of design and the importance of embracing other modalities as well. So for those of you who don't know, Star-Crossed is a two-player game. It's cooperative, not competitive. You cooperate with each other. You don't even compete with an outside imaginary thing. It's not a pandemic type deal. And it's very much a role-playing game, story game, you might say. It uses a Jenga tower to tell the story of two people who really, really want to, but they really, really can't. Oh, everybody just fan yourselves harder. So if you know, I don't know, Tristan and Isolde, or Romeo and Juliet, or whatever the case may be. Some might say Scully and Mulder, but I know that's controversial. I can't stop the fanfic. But it's about any two people who are really into each other, but they have a compelling reason not to act on those feelings. And that can be external and it can seem unjust, or it can come from inside them. I think all of us have been in situations where we want something, maybe very mutually want something that we unfairly can't have, or that we know genuinely to just not be right, not be the right time, not be morally right. In my game, it's completely up to you. There are no preset play sets. In fact, about half of the game is the two players negotiating what they are interested in and what their limits are and what they're excited about and what kind of story they're very compelled by. It's a very, very fun consent negotiation that I think is quite positive. So, like I said, you have this tower of increasingly shaky tower of wooden bricks. And every time that you do something, your character does something that increases the intimacy between your two characters, you pull a brick and put it on top. So you're playing a little game of Jenga, except when the tower falls, your characters act on their feelings. And maybe that's a good thing, and maybe that's a bad thing, but depending on how many bricks you've pulled, more means a more dramatic outcome. Not necessarily positive or negative, but if you've only pulled 5 bricks and the thing topples, then things just kind of fizzle out, and it's sort of unfortunate. Ooh, you really spoke too soon. Now this is awkward. But if you've pulled 20 bricks and the thing falls over, it's just like the space station is exploding behind you. I don't care. The Federation can think that we're dead. All we need is each other. Yeah, and so much more. It's possible for the game to end without the tower falling, in which case the two characters never act on their feelings. Sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes it's just very bittersweet and sad. And I think that's a legitimate ending to the game, too. It can end that way because there are 8 scenes that you play out. That will become relevant later. So that's the base of the game. And if you can't tell from the fact that it involves a tower of wooden bricks, it was very much inspired by one of my first loves in tabletop role-playing, Dread. How many of you have heard of Dread? Good. It's a lovely game. It's very simple to pick up. If you have some GMing experience, it's super easy to run, and it's a wonderful, very non-intimidating, kind of familiar game, approachable game for new players. That's what I really love about it. And it was really only my second or third role-playing game, and after playing it, for those of you who don't know it, it uses a tumbling tower to tell a horror story. So when the tower falls over, you die. Even more dramatic, arguably. But it's played in a large group, and you play, a slasher fic or a cosmic horror, Lovecraftian, whatever it is. So I played that game. I played Beneath a Metal Sky. It's still my favorite. And I thought, oh man, that was so amazing. I really felt afraid. I really felt the tension when I played this game. It was just amazing. Man, I can't wait until someone makes a play set for it where you're playing sexual tension. That's going to be so amazing when someone definitely makes that. It's a shame I'm not a game designer. And, since I'm not a game designer, there's no way I could possibly make it. But, some really genius game designer out there is going to make that, and I will play it, and I will love it. I think that was about 5 years ago. And no one made it. No one did that thing. Despite me putting that idea out there into the universe, the secret does not work. But that was my thought that, I'm not a designer. Otherwise, I would do it myself. So let's talk a little bit about design. So design is a way of making stuff. It's not just game design. The basic principle is just that you have a goal, you have something that you want to happen, and you have some theories about how that could occur. So you implement your mechanism that, I want X. I think if I do Y, if I cause Y, then Y might cause X. So you do Y a couple of times in a controlled environment and then measure X to see if you got it, and if so, how much. And if you didn't, then you pick one variable and you change it on Y. So now we have Y.1. Give that a shot. And so on and so on and so on. You test and retest and retest and retest until you get that perfect X, until you get exactly 1.8 milliliters of X. And then you have successfully designed your thing, and you're good to go. So that's one way of making games. You say, I want a game that makes players cry. And so here's one way you could probably make somebody cry. And you implement it, you play test it, and keep playing it with groups of people, maybe play it with lots of different groups of people, maybe from different backgrounds and play styles at different times of day, in different times of the year. If you really want to cheat, you play it in the middle of winter. And then if they cry, then your game is successful. Maybe you could even measure how many tears you kind of get out of them, or duration of crying activity. So when you're working in design, I think with a game, the things you can successfully do are make a statement or accomplish a measurable outcome. And we'll talk about measurement. So you can either successfully communicate something to someone, you can give them a thought that you have, and then they can think that thought, or you can give them a feeling, right? You can say at the end of it that they really struggled with that, or they were terrified, or they were really excited, or they really laughed. You've accomplished that, and that's measurable in some way. Thoughts or feels, basically. Did you give them the thought? Did you give them the feel? That has limitations. So we limit what games can do when we design them to things that are measurable, right? How do you know whether or not your game accomplished the thing? You have to figure out some way of evaluating it. And when you do that, there's lots of things that aren't measurable, that aren't evaluatable. And those things aren't just sort of incidentally, oh, it's a shame we can't get to them. Those things, in my opinion, are the most important things in the world. There's no way to measure meaning or faith or love or any of the things that make life really worthwhile. We can come up with ways that we think that we measure them, and I certainly did. I've got a little pie chart being like, hey, did you get turned on while playing this game? And it says, there's a little slice of pie for kinda, and one for definitely, and one for do not want to answer because I did, and so on. So we can pretend that we're measuring these things, but we're not really measuring. I wasn't measuring how turned on people got. I was measuring how they were willing to answer to a little Google form. So the design process for Star-Crossed, I think, started that day when I said, okay, Dread, amazing, cool, this idea that will never happen or someone else will do it. But I actually kind of started to make the game via a convention called Metatopia. Has anyone here heard of Metatopia? Some American convention? Hey, cool. Americans are very into design, I discovered. So there's this genuinely, totally amazing, if you can ever get stateside, this is the con to go to, IMO. It is the place that is dedicated strictly to testing games. So it's just a playtest con. You can either just go and show up to play stuff that you know is not done, or you can bring something yourself, and you will have a bunch of players there ready to test it for you. So I was very excited to go, and someone had convinced me that I should test this idea that I had. So I brought it to Metatopia. And so really the first bold step in designing Star-Crossed was between 11:30 and midnight, the night before we had to get up in the morning and drive 8 hours to Metatopia. Me sort of like this on the table with about 40 index cards in front of me, crying, because I was like, I signed up to run this game, and I told them that I would do it, and they set me up with all of these, play testers, and they're going to be so disappointed because this isn't a game; it's just a pile of scraps of paper with nonsense written on them. So that was my sort of, the beautiful genesis, the beautiful birth of Star-Crossed, was a bunch of stuff, ideas that I'd written down on index cards, and then I shakily brought that. And hoped, maybe this will be a game. But sure enough, I did design it. And there are lots of aspects of design that were super, super important in how Star-Crossed turned out. So I did bring it there, and I did play test it. I handed people things of cards. We played. I looked at how they reacted. I gave them feedback forms, asking them how they felt and what did they enjoy, what didn't they enjoy. And over the process of playtesting, I learned to more or less ignore what was on the forms, but I was still measuring by observing. I would try my very best to sort of do this like Jane Goodall, pretend I'm not there, observation of behavior, and I was looking for giggles. Giggles are the most, they were like sweet candy to me. I was looking for hands touching the face. That's a very good one. Looking in each other's eyes, looking away from each other's eyes. There were just I was looking for body language. And if I saw the body language that I wanted, I was happy. And whatever they were doing at that moment, I would say, okay, keep. And if they did things like get bored or have lots of silence or go, then, okay, whatever they're doing right now, I need to have a little bit less of that. So I certainly did design it. But I also learned to let go of my design goals and start to let the project become its own thing a little bit. For example, early on, I mentioned the premise to someone, and they were like, oh yeah, it's like fanfic, the game. And I was like, no, it's not for fanfic. How dare you? That just wouldn't work because you have to make up your own characters. It would fail completely. That's not what it's about. But sure enough, I was sitting next to two guys, and they played Obi-Wan and Anakin from Star Wars, a chapter of the Clone Wars you have never seen. And when they started talking about it, I thought, oh no, this game, oh God, this is going to be really bad. I feel so bad for these two dudes doing something that's not going to work at all. And it was amazing. It was super fun. It was not the game that I would have come up with or played, but they had a wonderful time. And I still wouldn't say that Starcrossed is the game of fanfic. I believe that would be Slash. But certainly lots of other people have played fanfic with it, and they kind of love it. So already the sort of like strict modality of design started to crack around that time. I also started to think about, what is my game saying? What is the statement that my game is making? Because as we all know, if you read design studies and game studies in big important textbooks, you will know that games make statements. So I started thinking about, okay, well, my game says this about forbidden love. My game says this about about relationships and lust and feelings and structures of power and how different setups of whatever. I came up with something that you could present as a thesis. And that was like a huge waste of time, because maybe games make statements, but I think if you decide your statement in advance and then design a game around it, it's going to end up kind of trite. And if you already had your statement, there's a really good question of like, why'd you make a game then? Because you could have just said it with your words, in your mouth. I think your game may be saying things, but make the game first and then figure out what you didn't even realize you wanted to say. And I realized that my game was a lot more about questions. And I think questions can be about things that are immeasurable or inarguable or infinitely arguable, even better. And so Starcrossed is really about questions like, why do I seem to fall in love with people when it definitely super won't work? Why do I keep having crushes on married men and straight women? What is it about not just the forbidden, but specifically the doomed, that people seem to find so entrancing and exciting? What is that spark? And that's still not a question that I have an answer to. And I don't think anyone has the ultimate answer to. I think it's a lot more fun to ask that question than it is to answer it. Could be because I have a background in theology, and answers, if anybody tells you they have answers, you should not believe them. But the people who are asking the questions, I love hanging out with those people. So the other thing I realized is that more design does not mean better game. There is you eventually sort of run out of value when you keep playtesting over and over and over again, hoping that it will just sort of make your game for you. At some point, you have to realize that you are the creator and you are responsible for creating it. You have to just kind of make it. Because games are art, yeah? Everybody's kind of on board with that? That's really boring to argue about, so I'm not going to. I mean, games are art, like anything else. And perfecting your craft before you can begin your great work, your masterpiece, is, according to some artists I've talked to, kind of a really common fallacy. The idea that like, okay, no, I can't work on this great idea that I have because I'm not there yet. I need to, I need to make my little studies, and I need to do this kind of lesser idea so that I can work on it. I'm a comics artist, so I'm just going to sit here and draft and draft and draft and draft. And once I'm an incredible artist, then I can make my art, right? Once I'm a great game designer, then I can make my game. So when I started working on Starcrossed, that night before Metatopia, I made things like the 8 scene cards that are still in the game to this day. Like I said, it plays out as a series of scenes, and each scene begins with a little card, that you can kind of picture, like the title of a chapter or the intertitles in a silent film. They just say little things like an introduction or close, quiet, and alone. They set the tone for the scene and give you something to do. And I wrote those in 2 seconds, and they're the same cards that are being printed in China right now. I needed to. I was tired and I needed to get to sleep. The epilogue chart that tells you how dramatic your outcome is, a lot of people have asked me how I calculated which number of pulls goes with how dramatic of an outcome. And I didn't calculate it. I put numbers on the page, and then I put words on the page next to them. And I think those have been adjusted slightly, but not according to any kind of logic, I promise you. And maybe to some people, careful calculations are very fun, and they'd be fun to kind of dash off and write down. But you just need to get something down. That is not to say that I did not waste a lot of time making this game, because I tweaked and I tested over and over and over again, and I perfected. I was so careful. Okay, I better rewrite this section. It's almost done, so I better make sure I don't finish it. And like I said, I took a lot of feedback that was completely useless. And I worked on it for such a long time, kept it close to my chest, because I was scared. And I think this is true of a lot of people, that when you put something out there, that's hard enough. But when you put something out there and it's a draft, it's in progress, this is an early version, you feel like, okay, if people don't like it, they'll be gentle with it, and they'll understand that it's not yet a complete and total expression of me. Only when it's complete is it a piece of myself that then if people attack it, they're attacking me. It's totally normal to be afraid of that, but that means that you will never finish this thing that means something to you because you're afraid. And that's like kind of being afraid is a bad reason to do anything, much less deny yourself the satisfaction of being done with something that you've been working on for years. So just like the artist, you may find yourself saying, I can't make this game because I'm not a great designer, right? That's how I felt. I can't make this piece of art because only a great artist could make a great piece of art. Only a game designer, think of a great game designer who you know. Oh, only they could make the kind of great idea, and make the game that I want to make. Only they could do that. So maybe someday I'll be that great, and then I can make my great game. But I am delighted to tell you that making the game is what makes you the great designer. You are actually in charge of that process. It doesn't happen the other way around. I waited years and years, from that first Dread game until I grabbed a partner who I happened to be role-playing a lot with at the time, and said, okay, so I want to try this sexy Jenga thing. Can we just play Jenga, but it's like a role play and it's sexy? And he was like, okay, yeah. That was a long time to sit around and not do it. And I did not become a great designer in the interim by working on other things or avoiding it or whatever. I don't know if I'm a great designer now, but I don't know. I'm not further away. For my next game, which is called For the Queen, I woke up one morning having thought of an idea the previous evening. I wrote it down. It was very bad. It's changed a lot. But I wrote it down, and I called up some friends. I got a group chat going, more specifically. And I said, Tuesday, is everybody free on Tuesday? Okay, enough people are free on Tuesday to give this thing a whirl. We gave it a whirl. It was flawed, but we had an okay enough time that I kept working on it and basically just took out 90% of it and just kept going and kept going and kept going. And now it's coming out March, February 2019. So you can... So I learned to hurry the fuck up, basically. And If you have an idea, you can just start. You can just put it out there. And there are certain aspects of design that will help you. I do believe that, right? Putting something out there, seeing what happened when you did, and then looking at it again and making adjustments and sending it back out there. That's not a bad process to incorporate. But design will not make the game. The game is in your heart, and you have to use things like art. You have to trust yourself that there's something worthwhile in this idea that you have, and you have to just Jackson Pollock it onto the page. And maybe you'll end up with a Jackson Pollock. Those things are worth like millions, right? So, design. Cool, interesting. I'm glad we've started using it to help us make games. But ultimately, games are still art. The games are still inside us. And it's still ultimately a mysterious process if you want to make a game about mysterious things. And I think that mysterious things are a lot more interesting than anything that you could measure. So that's pretty much my talk, but I want to know if people have questions. Oh, you Finns, you have no questions. This is the worst. Hi, you got something?
Hi. Yeah, okay, no, mine. Can you hear me, or do I need to shout more, or?
I'll repeat your question in the thing.
Perfect. So, well, I related a lot to what you were saying from the perspective of someone that actually doesn't get anything done. But do you know this book called The Art of Procrastination? It's a book I can recommend very, very much. It's written by a professor who, at some point, he realized that everyone held him as someone who gets lots of stuff done. And the concept he had of himself was actually leaving everything to the last second and not getting anything. And it was this realization that all the stuff that he was getting done while on the way of doing these magnificent things were the magnificent things by which people were judging him. So, I mean, at some point, I mean, it's really good to have this type of deadlines that sometimes you create yourself, like going to this con and having to, just forcing yourself to put it out there, to spit it out. Thank you, it was really inspiring.
Well, thank you for that. So just for the recording, it was a book called The Art of Procrastination. Do you remember the artist? Sure. The Art of Procrastination, and the moral of the story is that all of the things that you get done in between, or while you're putting off your great work of art, are really the great works of art. Does anyone have a question? Yes?
Do you think Starcross being a two-player game is a key aspect of it, or have you ever considered or tried it more with 2 players?
So the first and most frequent alteration or hack that I get asked about is to have it for more than 2 players. And that would theoretically make a lot... It would be really cool. And there are so many relationships that work that way. And also, it makes so much sense, because what is more difficult to keep together than 3 people? So it's potentially a really, really cool idea, Starcrossed with more than 2 players. I haven't really made it myself, but I keep hearing from a lot of people who sound a lot like me when I played Dread, who were like, oh, I hope someone makes a 3-player game. And I'm like, someone? So, what I need to do is get all of you into the same like group chat or Facebook group or G+ group or something, and then eventually everyone will just talk to each other and make it happen. I think it has a lot of potential. Something that I do feel, though, is that Starcrossed, I think, is inclusive of polyamorous characters, because every relationship is composed of dyads, right? So even if they're, you could have a partner who has another partner, you have a relationship with them, you have a relationship with them, they have, do you see what I mean? And so I think that there are lots of interesting stories around characters who have other partners, or you could be one piece of this gigantic polycule, or whatever it is. Your life doesn't get simpler when you have lots of partners. And I think it actually presents really interesting stories that are, to me, a lot more interesting than your sort of like classic, oh, I'm married so I can't kind of things. But thank you for asking about it. John Perry, The Art of Procrastination. Thank you. More questions? Yes? I'll get to you.
You mentioned earlier that you had publication dates for both the games you talked about in North America, but you didn't have anything for Finland specifically. I was wondering if you had anything for Europe.
So the thing about most role-playing games is that you figure out when you're making it, and then distributors are so small in different countries that you kind of like wait on individual deals with individual folks, and it's kind of like, I'll call Greg, and then whenever Greg gets back to me, we'll start to figure something out. So I don't know when any of them are going to be in any particular country, but get in touch with me, follow me on Twitter or something, because I get very excited whenever my games are in other countries, so I'll certainly talk about it. Thank you.
When you were playtesting the game, it definitely sounds like it's a very emotionally intense and intimate experience. Were there people who played it who were not already partners, and like did that change the gameplay and the sort of emotional reactions that they had?
Great, thank you. So the question is about, are there sometimes people who are not partners who play Star-Crossed, and how does that change it? Yeah. So most of the people who have played Star-Crossed are not in a romantic relationship. I know of at least one case where they were after. Most of the people who were playtesting were doing so at conventions, so they just signed up for it. And I don't know what they thought they were signing up for, but they would just play with randoms. Or they would bring a friend, and two friends would play. In one case, one player dropped out, so I got to play with a total random. And when that happened, I was really nervous, because I had only personally play tested it with either a partner or a friend. Here I was at this con with someone I'd never met before, and we were going to play my game that's about wanting each other very, very badly. And I thought, I'm kind of uncomfortable right now. This is really, really good for me to test. Let's see if my safety mechanisms hold. Let's see if they're actually useful. And they were. It was a wonderful experience. We told a really, really beautiful story that felt real, and the characters were very into each other. But the nice thing about Star-Crossed is that sometimes the story is very serious, and people are super into each other, and it's tragic, or it's passionate. But sometimes, like I said, it's Star Wars fanfic, and not that Star Wars fanfic can't be serious. But in that particular case, that were two people who had never met each other before, and their story was very over the top and silly. So I think when people don't want to be too intimate, and usually that's with strangers, they go a little more on the humorous side to kind of to build a little bit of a barrier, and that's not a bad thing. That's a perfectly legitimate game of Star-Crossed when it's a little on the silly side. Now, on the other hand, I think there are certain ways in which it is easier to open up to a stranger than it is to your partner, because there are fewer consequences, right? The feeling of, I'm never going to see them again. They can see whatever side of me, and not my problem. If they judge me, I'll, okay, bye. As where, your partner, it's beautiful to open up to another person, but there's consequences, right? It changes your relationship. So I have occasionally seen people who don't know each other play very serious, very intimate games. And I've seen couples who played games that were just very light. Sometimes you have a hard day at work and you just want to play a game that's kind of silly and kind of sweet. So surprisingly, I think, and counterintuitively, I haven't really found a correlation, not that I have really hard data, between how well you know the person or how intimate you are out of game to how intimate or serious the characters and their story is. Thank you for asking. We've got 10 more minutes. Do we have another? Hi.
You mentioned that you did some observing of players playing the game when in development. Can you talk more about that? Do you think you affected the situation by observing, and how does observing make you feel as a person or a designer?
Sure, thank you. So the question is about observing and how it affected the game and how it affected me. So there was two ways of observing. Very early on, when I was almost facilitating the game, it's GM-less, right? So it's just two players, and you should just be able to get by with the rules. But early on, I kind of had a very active hand in it. I was explaining it as I went, because there wasn't a game text. There was, So I liked doing that a lot. It felt great. Right? People come in and they're nervous, and you put them at ease, and you get them kind of excited about it, and then you get to feel as they get to know each other over the course of playing, and you slowly step back, and then they're just with each other, and it's wonderful. Walking in and just having to sit there while people try to figure out the first draft of your game, and they run into all the typos and the mistakes and the things that aren't explained, and you've told yourself, I'm not going to interfere. I'm not going to interfere. That would ruin the point of doing this. That was miserable. That sucked. But it was important. And it helped me identify all the ways that the text needed to be clearer or organized differently or whatever. So that's how it felt for me. I know that it definitely affected the game because I could see the difference depending on how obvious I made my presence, right? So if I was, very close to the players and, obviously looking at what they were doing and I didn't have anything in front of me, people were hesitant, they looked down more, they didn't look at each other as much, they weren't as open with their ideas, it took longer to get the game going. When I sat further away, when I either made notes or pretended to, and when playing on my phone was great. That was like disappearing. It was awesome. When I did those things, I noticed that they opened up to each other more. They were laughing more. Their voices were a little bit louder. They were looking at each other, not at me. So, and at certain points, I would leave the room. So I know that was ideal. The frustrating thing is, though, that then I couldn't get any data. And I did totally external playtesting where I just sent the text to people and then they filled out a feedback form online. And that seems ideal because then I'm not there to interfere, but also the feedback that I got, because it was only like written and answering multiple choice questions and stuff, was not as good a quality as talking to people and seeing how they were feeling when they were telling me about the game. And sometimes there would be a delay between when they could play and respond. So you kind of have to, yeah. Thank you, that was a good question. Mm-hmm.
How would you feel the game having, could it be used as a tool besides being just entertainment and for like people with social anxiety or anything like that, where they might sort of process those issues through the game?
So could it be used as a tool for folks with social anxiety? That is a really good question, because I think if you had social anxiety, it would be really hard to play, or it might be a little bit easier than your standard role-playing game because there's only two of you. So I would love to hear from folks who have social anxiety, who have played, to tell me about it, because I wonder if it's just like a terrible, painful challenge, or if it, it makes certain things easier. I do have the idea that it could be kind of an educational tool, because the setup process is, world building and character building, but really what you're doing is very much a consent negotiation. People say you have to say the kinds of things to each other that I would really like for people to be saying to each other before sex. Just things like, not just what are your limits and what do you not want to see in this game, but rather, and that's there, but what are you super excited about? what kind of story do you really, really want to tell right now? And, oh, I love that idea. Can we do more of this? And I'm actually not feeling that today. So the way that you talk about what you want and what you don't want in the game, I've very, very carefully crafted, because it's super important to me that nobody is playing a game of Starcross that they are just okay with. It is forbidden. It is against the rules. I seriously do not want anybody to play Starcross with anyone or about anything that they are not like, hell yeah, best ever, awesome, so excited. That's very important to me. So if people are picking up a couple of helpful phrases and, ways to structure a conversation that they then take into other areas of their life, if that's happening, I'm very happy. Maybe we can do one last question? Yes?
How important were your close friends to designing the game, and do you think it's important to have like a close group of friends to play test it?
I have a couple of friends who are absolutely essential to this game getting made. And some of them I play tested with, but some of them just like, when I think about my partner Sean, who basically just at all times has said like, no, this is the best, you'll make the greatest game ever, you can do anything. This is, it will be amazing, everyone will love it, unwaveringly, When I think about Jason Morningstar, who would have long conversations with me, helping me get that text together, which was a very long and painful process. My good friend James D'Amato, who is like the biggest cheerleader for this ever, and who would just play at the drop of a hat. So I really, really do believe in having supportive pals. If they can play your game, that's awesome. That's really good. And that's been the case with For the Queen. I've had lots of friends who I can play with. It's a bigger kind of 3 to 5 person game. But even if they just will look at the text for you, or will, talk to you about your ideas, over coffee, or remind you to sleep and not stay up all night working on it, or just tell you that you are awesome and that your game is awesome. Have people like that and be that person as well. Be in mutual relationships like that. This game would not exist without certain people. I really like that question as a last thing. That feels like a great note to end on. Thank you all so much for coming out and listening to me talk about my game. It makes me really happy to share with you all.